industry conversation right here on the Connect for Culture podcast, Uganda. My name is Patrick Sentongo and I welcome you today. Good morning, and how is it going everywhere that you're tuned in from? Now today we are going to be discussing the public funding in the creative and culture industries and how all that is going. So today I am joined by Mr. Amos Tindiebwa. Mr. Amos, you could say hello to our viewers.
Good morning, viewers and listeners.
All right.
I'm glad to be here.
Yes, now Mr. Amos is an economist and a policy expert. He will be engaging with us and discussing more about this particular topic. But before we do that, late last year, the leadership of the Connect for Culture program in Uganda handed over a report, a baseline study and a stakeholder mapping for public investment in Uganda to the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development. And this particular report was received by the Commissioner of Culture at the ministry, Miss Juliana Naumo. And now this particular report is the one that we are going to base our discussion on today. Now, research has it, as per this report, that our industry has been underfunded over the years. And if you're to look at the fiscal years of 2021, 2022, 2022 to 2023, the funding was actually less by 1% of the general budget of our country. And sadly, as per this same report, chances are that in this financial year of 2025-2026, that particular funding might even go very lower. So Mr. Amos was the lead expert and researcher on that particular report, and I am very glad once again to welcome you. Let's start with the basics. When you took on this particular research, what were your biggest expectations and what surprised you most about the state of public funding in this country, Uganda?
Thank you, moderator, and thank you once again, listeners. I'm glad to be here to reflect on the study that was done last year on public funding for culture. This study, I'm glad to mention, was supported by Connect for Culture and Serum initiatives, which are working in Uganda and some of the African countries. The study that was sponsored was actually timely, and it was building on some of the previous studies that had been done in the sector. And just to focus more on the question you have raised, what surprised me or what was expected? Just like other previous studies, we expected to unearth a more negative budget support on culture. And we this time wanted to move away from the center to the lowest level of administration of government, to see where culture is dying from. I can call it dying from. Why is the culture not coming up? Why culture is not being funded? And what I expected was that it would be a confirmation that actually culture has been underfunded for a long time. And at all levels of government, there hasn't been any deliberate effort to increase funding for culture. And the study affirmed this with a lot of statistics on budget allocation across government.
Yes. Now, this particular study revealed that for the past years, the general funding that comes into this particular sector is usually less than 1%. To break it down for, a normal Ugandan and a practitioner in this industry, what does this mean for them? An upcoming artist there, a budding visual artist, a songwriter, and name it, most of these players in this industry.
First of all, when we talk about funding being less than 1%, what rings to the minds of every listener is that culture is being taken as a negligible sector. And that all priorities of government, be it at the center and the local government, they are not looking at culture as an engine for economic development. And what speaks to the filmmaker or the musician is that the sector will remain dodged with no infrastructure. The sector will remain unregulated. Professional development will remain lacking. And the very various problems that affect the growth of revenues, entrepreneurship, and career in the sector will remain hampered by this lack of funding.
Okay.
Yes, public investment is the one which drives infrastructure and which drives growth across the different practitioners.
Okay, Mr. Tindieba, with all this in play, where exactly is the problem, if I may ask?
The fundamental problem has been the lack of voice. The lack of voice across government for the culture sector, and also the lack of planning with information. Much of the advocacy done across different sectors of the economy is based on statistics, information on production, information on dimensions, information on employment, information on incomes. But much of this information has for a long time been lacking in the culture sector. But even when there has been effort towards generating this information, it hasn't been brought to the front line in planning and in national development processes.
Okay, in this particular report, you mapped out stakeholders that are, related with solving some of these particular issues. What do you have to say about them, and where has everything lagged from? If you could speak about it from the structure level.
First of all, government is the principal provider of finance.
Yes.
And if we have to change the culture sector, government must be spoken to. And the government must be willing to listen and to pay attention to the needs of the sector.
Okay.
Secondly, artists must stop speaking to themselves.
Self-centered.
Self-centeredness. Artists should not act as if they are in a gathering of a funeral. Everyone is grumbling. Everyone is speaking that we are lacking this, but we are speaking to yourselves. Artists must be organized in a manner that they can speak to government to support the sector. And this cuts across film, music, visual arts, and so forth. They must have a concerted voice towards government to raise support for the industry. Okay,
the common voice, I remember last year in November when we were handing over the report to the ministry officials, government always speaks of their commitment to the arts. And also artists keep claiming that our industry is capable, our industry brings in this much. Where has the line been drawn between the artists who claim their industry is bringing in much, and where is government? Is it the government will? Why is this funding? Why is it becoming a problem for government to fully inject in or offer this much support, even when they keep claiming they are committed?
I think I will take this matter through the national development planning process. First of all, government engages stakeholders in development planning.
Differently, yes.
And at different levels of planning, the priorities of government are identified, leave alone the political statements that come along the planning process. What is important is that during the technical planning process, what aspects of culture go into the national development plan.
Okay.
And if the national development plan is going to be a basis for allocation of resources, if the culture sector is not there, then there's no money for the culture sector. Artists who speak that we bring so much probably have a self-centered mind, isn't it?
Okay.
Why don't we have a single voice of what the industry brings and how much government should put back to generate more from the sector?
Okay, but maybe, Mr. Amos, we start from here. What exactly, how much is it that this industry brings in for the country?
I think recent estimates show that the culture sector contributes approximately US dollars 576 million annually. But if you compare this to what budget allocation comes to the sector, then we are on a downward trend towards even reducing what we are getting from
exactly what what I was going to come to.
Yes.
When you look at last year's fiscal, the budget, the financial year, I think the sector was given around 0.018% of the national budget.
Yes.
And the particular report we are discussing today shows that this year we might have a decline to around 0.016%.
Yes.
Is it that the stakeholders that were mapped in this particular report are not doing enough? Where is the problem?
The stakeholders haven't been convinced enough on why they should put money in culture. The most recent problem we have seen is politics fused into the industry. And when there is a group towering a political line, then that already creates problems for the industry. And of course, that will not stop. Globally, it happens, and here it will happen. But what is important is that at a broader sector level, what can we document or what can we show as a contribution of culture towards economic development in issues like job creation,
yes,
in issues like sustainable development, in issues like poverty reduction, in issues like revenue generation and
yes,
contribution to tax. And if these are clearly demonstrated to the planning units of government, then with or without the politics within the industry, we can see government increasingly funding the art, the culture and creative industry. And I'm also happy to mention that in much of the recent statements of the planning Ministry of Finance, part of the tenfold strategy is the creative industries.
Okay.
So we need to tap into that opportunity that the statement is coming from the technical arm of government to raise support for the industry.
Okay, you've talked about the marriage now between the industry and the political, if I might call it the politics or the political economy,
Yes.
and also the leadership. The report offered some recommendations. So basing on what you've just said and also given the realities of the politics in being in bed with this industry, what were some of the recommendations, and did they put these particular aspects in play?
One of the biggest recommendations we made was an advocacy platform. But this advocacy platform must be driven by a higher organ of government.
Like?
Probably the office of the Prime Minister. Because the coordination activities of the government are all centered around the office of the Prime Minister.
The OPM.
And if we have to move the sector towards recognition within the planning process of government, the office of the Prime Minister needs to play a key role. And the artists, irrespective of the political divide or the differences they have, they must speak to the sector in a common voice so that we can see the sector growing even for those who have no political sides. Isn't it? Because the long run trajectory is that the culture must grow for the benefit of the players. And it is very important that we voice this strongly in the planning and coordination activities of government. The second recommendation was reforming the laws. There are many laws that affect financing, public financing. There is a Finance Management Act. It is a very important instrument. There is the credit insurance schemes of government. There is also the credit facilities of government. And of recent, we have seen parish development model. But if you question the extent to which the culture and creative industry gets relevant into these laws of government, it is hardly recognized. And yet those are the areas in which we can tap into public funding for the industry.
Yes, because you see, with that background,
Yes.
I want to speak for the typical, Ugandan artist.
Yes.
You see, our country has policy documents almost on everything. So when a recommendation like working closely with the OPM or the Office of the Prime Minister taking up something like this, a typical Ugandan will see this as just another, way of how government does its things. You do paperwork, it moves here and there, and we won't arrive to that exact solution, because today the industry is structured. The structures are very clear from top to bottom. But still, you'll find, tokens being given still by government or government officials who are still giving these tokens to individuals or cocoons within the industry, even when the structures are now very clear. If you want to help filmmakers, they have clear structures. If you want to help musicians, the structures are there. So is this solution not just another of those government kinds of ways of just panel beating things here and there?
I think it is very important to appreciate that working with government requires some level of patience, but it also requires some level of continuous engagement. You don't expect overnight solutions when we are working with government, but continuous engagement with government will definitely yield results. But most importantly, I want to take an example of what is happening in other countries where the policies have paid off to the industry, and where the artists have really complied to the regulations, and where the systems are working. Yes. We have a country, for instance, like Nigeria, where one of the robust industry, the petroleum industry, is not working very well, and the complaints are so many. But when it comes to the creative economy, it is very robust, well organized. Government has paid attention to the industry because of the focused organization and the leadership within the sector. Even when the oil is perceived to be much bigger, but it is better organization within the creative economy. If you look at Nigeria, there are initiatives like the National Arts Fund, which is missing here. We don't have to achieve so many within the policy provisions of government, but we can zero down on one major thing that can help us develop infrastructure, improve skills, improve the quality of content, and develop talent, and also promote markets for the creative activities. So the National Arts Fund is a very important aspect of this sector, and even if we focus on achieving just one or two things within the industry, they can create an opportunity for the successes in other areas that are still lacking.
Okay, you've talked of the National Arts Fund in a country like Nigeria, but also as here in Uganda, we have what you would call structures below. Let me say, if the ministry is at the topmost layer, we have government agencies under that are handling culture. We have other institutions below that. For them, can't they, in the meantime, play the role that, probably some of those other institutions elsewhere are playing? And maybe also, is there a government will? Because if you talk about Nigeria and probably oil, is there, let me say, in terms of earning, gives so much, but they have also offered time to the creative industry, and they are seeing the benefits. Here, the industry has proven to be one that can bring in much. Is there a government will, or it's not there?
I think there is government will, and in many pronouncements of government, there is interest for the creative economy. But I think on the side of the stakeholders, there hasn't been a strong effort to bring this to the table of decision making. There is interest for government to fund sectors that create jobs. And culture is one of the sectors that create jobs. If you look at the recent statistics from graduation, 7 out of every 10 graduates joined the creative economy. They are not joining agriculture, they are not joining manufacturing, but they are joining the creative economy. That is one aspect that we need to ride on. to even draw more government attention. Secondly, we have seen that culture creates a lot of impact on social cohesion and social development for urbanization and sustainable cities. So even if we are to attract tourism, culture plays a very strong role into this sector. And you have seen that culture is now driving so many forces within the democratic framework. So the interest of government and the will of government is eminent, is rather demonstrated, but we haven't really tapped that opportunity properly as the sector stakeholders.
A voice from the artists says, if you claim the government will is really there, key players, artists who have now organized themselves under structures that are vividly visible, they say the same government is the one, handling out tokens to individuals. As a lead researcher on this particular report, I want to get your view of this token funding to particular individuals vis-a-vis the entire general case by the industry players to have increased funding into our sector.
I think for the long time, government support has been more towards individualism than the sector support. And I think this is for the last 10 years or so. And I think what distinguishes what we need to do from tokenism is what are we offering for the industry. Tokenism may be across all sectors.
Yes.
But we have not had the same rise as is in the culture sector.
Okay.
If I'm in manufacturing and the government has given funding to a particular manufacturing industry, my role should not be how to cry over the other manufacturing industry that has received money, but how also to justify the need for money towards my own activities. So in the arts industry, when the government gives money to one artist, the rest of the year, the artist will spend much time condemning the other artists. And I think the best would not be to condemn the other artists, but the best should be how do we repackage our own selves also to tap into this kind of support that the government is extending to so and so.
Okay.
Than fighting.
Okay. Yes. Mr. Amos, understand you've worked closely with institutions like the UNESCO and other institutions that work closely with the culture and creative industries. It brings me now to the other question, which is away from public funding, I believe these institutions or there are other opportunities where artists, all institutions, all key players, stakeholders can seek funding that is not directly from the government, funding from institutions like UNESCO, the European Union. As a lead researcher on this, have these opportunities been tapped into, and if not, if yes, to what level, and if not, what is failing?
Thank you for that question. First of all, there is a lot of avenues in which artists can tap into resources for development agencies, for embassies here in Uganda, UNESCO, and others. But there hasn't been that concerted effort towards developing fundable proposals within our industry. UNESCO annually launches a fund under International Fund for Cultural Diversity, and there has been effort towards submitting applications by many Ugandans. But when you look at the quality of proposals that go to the funding, it is really very wanting.
You've read some of them. I
have participated in the evaluation of some of these applications, and usually applications have very clear guidelines
on
how to write, but you see the proposal writing totally something far from the guidelines, isn't it?
What is it that you blame?
So I think what is important is that at least at the intermediate level, sector associations, relevant government agencies need to build capacity of artist organizations to apply for this kind of resources.
Okay.
there hasn't been that capacity building. And there hasn't been much sensitization on the availability of these funds. The artists may not necessarily have to write proposals themselves, but they can mobilize limited resources, hire a competent person who can develop a competent proposal for funding. I think there is a need for that sort of capacity building to tap into those kind of external resources. But also what I want to mention is that most of the external resources have been very piecemeal, very small resources,
which makes public
making a fragmented impact across sectors.
Yes.
So if you fund the arts sector with $5,000, you are not making any difference.
Which leaves the main solution to be left to public funding from.
So I have looked at examples of funding proposals for the arts industry in the Caribbean, receiving more than $30 million. But most of the funding that has been coming to our region here has been $10,000, $15,000. The highest has been $150,000 distributed across 500 artists. It makes piecemeal, fragmented impact.
Is it because these particular institutions or donor funders, they also look at our internal public investment in the sector, and then they are like, if their governments can't offer them this much, why should we put in this much?
Most probably it is possible that donors want to see counterpart funding from government, but also they want to see consolidated partnership between artists groups towards achieving a certain goal. So if we have film producers, we have musicians, we have cinema makers or producers, we must see consolidated proposals towards capacity building across the industry players. Those kind of robust proposals attract funding. And if there is such kind of concerted efforts, then even the government has much interest to work towards counterpart support.
Understand the ministry, where the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development, where the CCIs fall under, in our country, Uganda. At the ministry, it's a department. And if public funding is still less, I think also the ministry at that level should be interested in tapping into some of these opportunities for external funding. When you talk about some of the proposals you probably looked at, terming them as wanting, or at the ministry level, I believe there is capacity to have, a touch of capacity building and hiring all these people to help with that. Is there also a structure problem at that level?
I think what we have said over time is that the ministry itself seems to be much far from appreciating the culture sector. The ministry is called the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development.
Yes.
If you compare the ministry with other ministries across the region, the other ministries are called the Ministry of Culture, Heritage and Arts. Ministry of Arts and Culture. But here we are struggling to look for the word culture in the ministry.
Yes.
The way we are struggling to look for the word culture is the way we struggle to identify
tap into
the strength of the department within that ministry.
Yes.
And that's how you will also struggle to convince the ministry to put more resources to that department. The department currently is very thin. It has a handful of staff.
It is understaffed.
It is understaffed, and it is also under-budgeted. So the department gets a parity trap of 0.016% of the entire ministry budget, meaning that it is insignificant within the structures of the ministry. So if it could be expanded to at least a directorate level, probably it could have more visibility, more strength, and more staff and more funding. And secondly, if proposals could come towards renaming the ministry, so that we don't have to struggle to find where culture is, then it can create a difference.
Is a quest for a directorate within the same ministry a solution? All the quests, as artists are putting it lately, that they want an independent ministry for the sector, which is more viable in the moment?
I think if you look at the trends within the government, creating new ministries and new agencies is not fashionable nowadays.
Okay.
But restructuring the existing institutions to bring visibility of the culture sector could be more feasible, and it is very possible to have this name of culture
Added onto
the ministry that is existing now, and to improve the visibility of the department within the ministry and also a budget support.
Okay, maybe to get it right, technically at ministry level, a directorate has a better funding or a better share of funding than a department. Is it what you're trying to?
Absolutely, a directorate is much bigger than a department unit or a unit of about 5 people. The Ministry of Culture is supporting more than 3 million practitioners of culture. But you can imagine how much 5 people need to do in order to address the glaring problems of the industry. And if you compare it with the other ministries, for instance, a department in agriculture sector, for instance, Department of Livestock and Animal Husbandry, it has a bigger team at the ministry level, but through the local government structures, you will find a livestock officer at all levels of local government. But you go to the district and look for the culture office. They will tell you that the person in charge of community development is the one responsible for culture, or the one in charge of women women affairs is the one for culture. So you get lost through the structures of government when you are too small at the top.
Okay.
Yes.
So being too small at the top, how about an entire agency around under the arts department, say of the Uganda National Culture Center, that works under that particular department at the ministry?
At least for a long time, there has been some level of complacence among institutions that deal with culture. Probably they have been reduced to institutions that receive subvention for salary only, but not for supporting the industry to grow. I'm sure the National Culture Center does not have any money to support any activities of the culture sector. Probably have funding for salaries and administration, but not enough money to do capacity building.
Okay. Given maybe the current situation, how has the creative and culture industries contributed to the national GDP?
First of all, culture,
probably then government tapping from that, they can pick interest.
We have previously documented that culture contributes approximately 11 billion annually towards GDP.
Okay.
And culture contributes to tax revenue, which we have also demonstrated. We have also indicated that culture goods and services are exported and they are contributing to our revenue earnings.
Okay.
We have also seen that culture entrepreneurs and businesses are generating approximately 3 billion annually in revenues in the pockets of individuals and business people and artists. So all these factored, they contribute substantially to around 3% of the national GDP.
Okay.
So we have said that even government gives around 5% back to the industry.
It's exactly what I was coming on.
Can,
they have ideally already seen this potential.
The potential is there. The potential has been documented,
but they have not risen up to the role.
There hasn't been a rise to the occasion.
From your expertise, what advice would you then give to stakeholders? In the first place, should they even pay the tax?
Yes, it is very important to pay tax. It is part of responsible citizenship.
Okay.
To pay tax.
Even when because not in agreement.
As we understand, the tax is a quid pro quo. Yes. You must not say that when I pay tax, then I must get this. Paying tax is a responsibility.
Okay.
Secondly, we must engage. And we must engage at that level of planning.
Yes.
You have seen manufacturers, You have seen agriculture sector, lobbying, the national development plan to prioritize the sector. And to make sure that a full dedicated section of is in the national development plan. This is how we need to do it for the culture sector. The culture sector is not any different from any other sector. We need to raise the voice.
Okay, as a lead researcher on this particular report,
Yes.
I want to imagine if you were given a chance to sit with the PSST or the Minister of Finance to probably reach this particular cause and its urgency, how would you advise them moving forward?
First of all, I would, I has already told you when the permanent secretary of the Ministry of Finance was in Europe last week, he said creative economy is a priority. He has actually thrown a blank check to the culture sector. If you say you are a priority, bring the priorities on the table.
So where do the stakeholders have to pick it from? A statement like that?
A statement like that is a blank check. Now we're saying, write on this check. What do we do? One is that we need to bring culture at the center of budgeting. And what are we budgeting for? And what are the outcomes of this budgeting? We need to quantify the number of jobs that we are going to create. We need to quantify the revenue that we are going to generate. We need to quantify the tax contribution we are going to make. And we need to show the impact on overall economic development of Uganda. I am very sure that the Minister of Finance will be willing to allocate more resources to this.
Okay,
sector.
You see, when you speak like that, you're generalizing.
Yes.
Let us have this blank check.
Yes.
The way we are calling it, a blank check.
Yes.
Who should that blank check be given to so that we start filling in? Who are these particular people to fill in that blank check?
First of all, we need to know who are the players in the industry. Informality has been for a long time in the industry.
Yeah, it has been normalized.
I cannot go to any sector association and say, how many musicians do we have in Uganda? What they will give me is the list of their friends.
Who they know of head.
Who they know of head. I will not go to the film sector and say, how many film practitioners do we have in Uganda? But if you go to the coffee associations and say, how many are coffee farmers in the Bugisu sub-region? They will give you the numbers. And what impact do you want to make over these people? That is the direction we need to take. We need to, there are many associations in the arts and culture who have come up, who have governance, and we need to see these institutions with numbers. We need to see them having a list of their membership, and we need to see how they are relating with their membership towards the capacity building, sensitization, and transformation.
Okay. All these groups have in the past claimed to be advocating and sending in these policy documents, these changes, their interests. Probably they have been doing it wrong. So is there a change in terms of advocacy? Is there a new energy, a new face of, new kind of advocacy that is required, and which is that?
I think interinstitutional advocacy is very important.
Collaboration.
Collaboration. Previously, in the engagements with CERAM and the CFCA, Connect for Culture Africa, we have organized an interagency advocacy platform. And we thought that this platform would help in influencing planning at different institutional levels, but also will draw into the resources of those very institutions. So planning in isolation has been one major problem. And culture being scattered everywhere has also been causing this gap.
The industry mandates are scattered.
You find that the Uganda Communication Commission has a lot of money for the culture sector.
Yes.
But few people appreciate that culture is there and not in the Ministry of Gender. So such kind of resource misplacement creates that kind of gap. And you think that there is no money for culture. Then you find another money for culture in the Ministry of Tourism.
Yes.
Then there's also resources that will be utilized for other purposes that not necessarily for the development of culture.
All right.
So interinstitutional coordination and advocacy is very, very important. And that's why we propose the sector working group.
Yeah, in this particular report.
Yes.
We've seen successful public funding models in other countries that work. Briefly, if you could break down, you could sample one or two of these countries that have models that are working and, you know, something you could share probably for our stakeholders here or industry players to pick a leaf, or even for government to, if we look at a way, if let me say, if we could hand pick and choose to implement without doing a lot of much work around it, which are some of these models and from which country?
I have already given you Nigeria, for instance, and the other country I would mention is Tunisia, which has a specific subvention on the culture. Tunisia looks at how much comes from a sector, and the subvention it relates to how much comes from this sector. So even across Uganda, we need to look at how much comes from the sector and how much can we plow back so that we can cause more development and more returns to government.
Okay.
Secondly, we have recently seen that the government of Rwanda is now paying more attention to the culture sector. And it is allocating more resources to the culture sector in order to increase global visibility and also to tap into regional opportunities, which is lacking here. And the government of Kenya is also allocating significant resources compared to Uganda towards the culture sector.
Okay.
So we don't need to innovate so much, but we need to create a mechanism where all concerned stakeholders can speak one voice and raise one request to government for the support of the sector. And the sector working group is very, very important because when you look at other sectors of the economy, agriculture, roads and whatnot, have a sector working group. And this has been helping them to address the funding gaps, which is lacking in the culture sector.
Okay, you've had a word for the stakeholders, for the government. All is said and done. I want you to have a word to artists themselves. Should they have hope? You see, they are in a way frustrated. You know, a lot of issues that are, you know, happening within their industry. A word to them. Should they have hope? How, as you look at things in the near future, or, you know, you could give a time space, how are things going to be? Should they be hopeful?
First of all, the artists or the culture practitioners need not to lose hope. Even at the prevalence of numerous problems, we have seen the sector thriving and flourishing. And what we need is to see more effort towards organization and collaboration.
Yes.
It doesn't matter how many sector organizations there exist in the arts industry. It doesn't matter who belongs where.
Yes.
But is there a common vision towards the development of the industry? That should be the umbrella or the binding framework for the artists and all practitioners in the industry. And we are seeing more recognition, more interest of the policymakers, practitioners, politicians towards the arts industry.
Okay.
So we need not to lose hope. We're actually on the right trend. We are on a trajectory towards getting what we want, because even those who want to vote say, if I take so and so, I will have more appeal to the public.
True.
So when politicians like parliamentarians see us more important, or see the artists more important, then there is likelihood that the future is brighter. We have about 10 artists in parliament, isn't it?
Yeah.
Previously, it was not the case.
Exactly.
And now when you see the artists going to contest, then it's a shaking platform. There's more influence.
Exactly.
The arts and the culture are creating more influence across the development and across policy making.
All right.
So there's more hope and there's a better future that we are looking at.
All right. Thank you so much, Mr. Amos, for your time, sparing time and, you know, speaking to us. This particular show happens every Thursday morning, and we shall be discussing more issues around the culture and creative industry. And just next week, for you to know, our viewer, we are going to be hosting someone from the Uganda Parliamentary Forum for Creative Industries. So you just have to watch out for that, because we want to dig deep and deep into this matter. Yeah. And for the people that would love to access this particular report, the baseline study and stakeholder mapping for public funding in the Ugandan culture and creative industry, you can check it out on various platforms, but the best one that you might get it very fast is the Ministry of Gender, Labour and Social Development website. Thank you so much, Mr. Amos, once again.
Thank you so much.
And I hope you can keep watching and also giving feedback and guiding over the time.
Yes.
Till next Thursday morning.